I'm Emily. I was 21 when my grandfather handed me a $50 million hotel empire, and that same night, my own father tried to take it away from me. You know, I've replayed that night in my head thousands of times, the way the candlelight flickered across those fake smiles, the sound of champagne glasses clinking while my world was about to shatter. Everyone was celebrating, but I felt this cold dread creeping up my spine, like I was walking toward my own execution. After the dinner, my dad arrived with his new wife. God, she smiled like she owned the world, like she was already queen of everything she surveyed. He looked at me with this strange mixture of entitlement and disappointment, and said we should manage it together as a family. The way he said family, like it was a weapon he could use against me. I looked him straight in the eye and told him, absolutely not. I'm the owner now. His face darkened in a way I'd never seen before. Like all the love he'd ever shown me was just evaporating in real time. Then pack your bags and leave this house. I froze. My own father, the man who used to carry me on his shoulders, who taught me to ride a bike, who promised he'd always protect me, he was throwing me out like garbage. And then, Grandpa chuckled. Not a happy sound, but something darker, more knowing. He looked at them and said, I thought this day would come. Before I tell you what Grandpa said next, please hit subscribe and like. It helps more than you realize. I share these stories because someone out there might need to hear them. Someone out there might be going through the same betrayal, the same heartbreak. Comment where you're watching from so I know I'm not alone in this nightmare. You have to understand what this hotel empire meant to me. It wasn't just buildings and revenue streams. It was my grandfather's blood, sweat, and tears. I grew up running through those hallways, watching him work 16-hour days, seeing him pour his soul into every architectural detail. While other kids were playing with dolls, I was sketching hotel lobbies and dreaming of sustainable luxury designs. Grandpa built this from nothing. He came to this country with $20 in his pocket and a head full of dreams. Every hotel, every renovation, every expansion, it was his love letter to the future, to our family's legacy, and I was the one who understood that vision. I was the one who could see what he was building beyond just profit margins. But my father stopped seeing the vision years ago, ever since he married her. That woman with her perfectly manicured nails and her designer dresses and her soul as black as midnight. She wrapped herself around my dad like a parasite, whispering poison in his ear night after night. I used to think my stepmom just wanted Dad's love. I was so naive, so stupid. She didn't want love, she wanted power. She wanted control. She wanted to strip everything meaningful from our family and turn it into her personal ATM machine. The way she operated was so subtle, so calculated. She'd host these family meetings, always suggesting that maybe I was too young to understand the complexities of business. She'd smile sweetly while questioning every decision Grandpa made, planting seeds of doubt about his mental capacity. Don't you think we should get a second opinion on this investment? Don't you think Emily needs more? Guidance? And my father, God help him, he ate it up. She made him feel like the important one, the decision maker, while systematically turning him against the man who gave him everything. I watched my dad transform from someone who respected his father into someone who saw him as an obstacle to overcome. I overheard them one night, planning to move Grandpa into assisted care. They thought I was asleep, but I was listening from the top of the stairs, my heart breaking with every word. They were discussing how to access his shares, how to modernize the business by selling off the historic properties that meant everything to him. She kept saying, "He's getting older, honey. Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions for the people we love." But the way she said love, it was like watching someone practice lines for a play they didn't believe in. Grandpa pretended not to know what was happening, but I could see it in his eyes. He was watching, listening, calculating. The man who built an empire from nothing doesn't survive by being naive about human nature. If you've ever had someone smile to your face while plotting behind your back, don't scroll away. Subscribe now, because what happened next It could happen to anyone with something worth taking. Anyone with family members who see inheritance as entitlement. The birthday dinner. God, I can still smell the lilies she insisted on using as centerpieces, too strong, too overwhelming, like everything else about her. The dining room was elegant, perfectly staged, like a movie set designed to showcase wealth and happiness. She sat there in her designer dress, playing the perfect daughter-in-law, the devoted wife, the caring stepmother. But I could see through her performance, the way she kept checking her phone, the way she exchanged glances with my father, the way she touched his arm whenever Grandpa spoke, like she was controlling a puppet. When Grandpa stood up with that leather folder, the room went silent. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, could hear the subtle clink of silverware as people shifted nervously in their seats. He opened it slowly, deliberately, and announced that everything, every deed, every trust, every share was being transferred to me. The shock hit the room like a physical force. I saw my stepmother's face go white beneath her perfectly applied makeup. I saw my father's jaw clench, saw his hands form fists under the table. And I felt terrified and proud, and completely overwhelmed all at once. That's when my dad's smile faded, and his voice turned into something I'd never heard before. Something cold and calculating and cruel. He demanded that we run it together as a family. Like he had any right to demand anything. Like the past 2 years of watching him systematically betray his own father meant nothing. Like I was supposed to hand over control to the people who'd been plotting to destroy everything Grandpa had built. I stood my ground. I had to. This wasn't just about money or business. This was about honoring the man who'd loved me unconditionally, who'd believed in my vision, who'd trusted me with his life's work. But she started crying. Of course she did. Crocodile tears streaming down her face, telling everyone how I was being influenced by Grandpa's declining mental state. How I was too young, too inexperienced, too emotional to handle such responsibility. And my father. My father looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was the enemy. His voice got louder, angrier, more violent. Then pack your bags and leave this house. Do you understand what that felt like? To have your own father choose a woman he'd known for 3 years over the daughter he'd raised for 21? To be thrown out of the only home you'd ever known because you refused to let vultures pick apart your grandfather's legacy? I stood there, shaking, feeling like the floor was dissolving beneath my feet. And then Grandpa quietly set his glass down and laughed. But that laugh wasn't amusement. It was warning. It was the sound of a man who'd seen this exact scenario play out in his mind 100 times and was finally ready to reveal his hand. You see, Grandpa had been planning for this moment for years. While they thought they were manipulating him, he was documenting everything. Every conversation, every meeting, every lie. He had recordings, legal documents, financial records, a complete paper trail of their betrayal. And he told us something that made my blood run cold. My stepmother's name had been flagged in multiple identity fraud cases across 3 different states. She wasn't just a gold digger. She was a professional con artist who specialized in infiltrating wealthy families and stealing their assets. The woman my father had fallen in love with, the woman he'd chosen over his own family, was a criminal who'd done this before. She had a pattern. Target older men with adult children, create division within the family, gain access to financial information, and then disappear with whatever she could liquidate. Sometimes the people smiling beside you are the ones waiting for you to fall. Subscribe now, because if you ever trust too easily, this story will wake you up. It'll show you how predators think, how they operate, how they turn love into a weapon. Grandpa started telling us about the warning signs he'd noticed from the beginning. How she'd immediately started asking detailed questions about the business structure, how she'd suggested updating his will for tax purposes, how she'd slowly isolated my father from his old friends, his business associates, anyone who might question her influence. He showed us phone records proving she'd been in contact with a lawyer specializing in contested wills. He had bank statements showing she'd already started moving money into accounts my father didn't know about. She'd been planning this takeover from day one. Using my father's love and grief, he was still mourning my mother's death as tools to manipulate him. I realized I was never just ignored or dismissed. I was targeted. She saw me as the biggest threat to her plan because I was Grandpa's favorite, because I understood the business, because I wouldn't be easy to fool or intimidate. Every time she questioned my judgment or suggested I was too young, she was trying to diminish my credibility so that when this moment came, no one would take my side. She didn't want to join our family. She wanted to replace it. She wanted to erase our history, our values, our legacy, and substitute her own version of success: quick profits, liquidated assets, maximum extraction with no thought for the future. The memories started flooding back as Grandpa spoke. I remembered the night she first came to dinner, 3 years after my mother died. Dad was still raw with grief, still vulnerable, still desperately lonely. She walked into our house, wearing this perfectly calculated outfit, elegant but not too flashy, expensive but understated. She knew exactly how to present herself. I watched her study our family photos, our artwork, our furniture. At the time, I thought she was just trying to understand our family history. Now I realize she was appraising everything, calculating its value, figuring out what could be sold and what was merely sentimental. She asked so many questions that first night, about the hotels, about Grandpa's health, about our family structure. She was so good at making it seem like genuine interest, like she cared about understanding the business that meant so much to the man she claimed to love. But there were little things, moments that didn't quite add up. The way she'd steer conversations away from her own past, how she'd change the subject whenever someone asked about her previous relationships or her family background. The way she'd get this calculating look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. Dad was so grateful to have someone show interest in his life again. After Mom died, he'd been lost, going through the motions of living without really engaging with anything. She made him feel valuable again, needed again, important again. And she used that gratitude to slowly poison him against everyone who might interfere with her plans. I remember the first time she suggested that maybe Grandpa was getting forgetful. It was subtle, just a concerned comment about how he'd repeated a story at dinner. "Maybe we should keep an eye on that," she said, squeezing Dad's hand. "Sometimes these things progress faster than we realize." Grandpa wasn't forgetful. His mind was sharp as ever. But she planted that seed of doubt, and every normal senior moment forgetting where he put his reading glasses, asking someone to repeat themselves in a noisy restaurant became evidence of decline in my father's mind. She was so good at playing the concerned daughter-in-law, always suggesting that maybe she and Dad should take on more responsibility to help Grandpa out, always volunteering to handle paperwork or attend meetings, so he doesn't have to worry about the side details. And I was watching it happen, seeing the manipulation unfold. But I was just a college kid. Who was going to believe me when I tried to explain that Dad's new wife was systematically isolating him from his family and taking control of his decisions, especially when she was so careful to always present herself as loving and supportive? The showdown happened in Grandpa's office, surrounded by decades of family photos and business awards. She kept trying to maintain her innocent act, but when Grandpa played the recording of her confessing her plan to liquidate the historic properties, her mask finally slipped. You should have seen her face when she realized she'd been caught. The sweet, caring stepmother disappeared, and what was left was something cold and calculating and desperate. She started making threats, talking about lawsuits and defamation, trying to intimidate us into silence. But my father, watching him realize what he'd done, what he'd almost allowed to happen, was almost worse than her anger. The guilt, the shame, the recognition that he'd betrayed his own family for a lie. It broke something in him that I don't think ever fully healed. Grandpa stood up slowly, with all the dignity of a man who'd spent 70 years building something meaningful, and said, "You're both fired. From my business and from my life." But Grandpa wasn't finished. He had one final surprise that none of us saw coming. He announced that he wasn't dying or retiring, he was testing us. Testing who would stand by the values he'd built this empire on, and who would abandon them for easy money. He transferred 51% of the shares to me, and 49% to a charitable trust established in my mother's name, completely locking out anyone who might try to exploit the family in the future. The will was sealed, ironclad, surrounded by legal protections that would take years and millions of dollars to even attempt to challenge. And he'd structured it so that if anyone tried to contest it, they would automatically forfeit any claim to any family assets forever. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just the granddaughter or the heir. I was the protector. I was the guardian of everything he'd built, everything our family stood for, everything my mother had believed in before cancer took her away from us. She tried to file a lawsuit anyway. Of course she did. But Grandpa's lawyers had been preparing for this for months, and when the investigation began, more evidence of her past scams started surfacing. She'd done this to at least 3 other families, leaving broken relationships and depleted bank accounts in her wake. The details that emerged were horrifying. In Denver, she'd convinced a widowed oil executive to liquidate his family ranch and invest the money in a fake development project. In Phoenix, she'd manipulated an elderly restaurant owner into signing over his business to her, claiming she was going to help him expand when she was actually planning to sell the land to developers. Each time, the pattern was the same. Target men who were grieving, isolated, or otherwise vulnerable, gain their trust through romantic attention and apparent genuine interest in their lives. Slowly isolate them from family members who might see through the deception. Create urgency around financial decisions by claiming health concerns or market opportunities, and then disappear with whatever assets she could access. My father's reputation in the business community collapsed overnight. The man who'd once been respected as the son of a hotel industry pioneer became known as the fool who'd almost handed his family's empire to a con artist. He left town within a month, ashamed and broken, and I haven't spoken to him since. But the damage she'd done went deeper than just financial. She'd destroyed the trust between father and son, had turned my dad into someone willing to betray his own family for a woman who saw him as nothing more than a mark. She'd corrupted his judgment so completely that he'd been ready to throw his daughter out of her childhood home to protect a criminal. Sometimes I wonder if he ever figured out the full extent of what she'd done to him. If he ever realized that she'd been recording their private conversations, photographing financial documents, copying passwords and account information. If he ever understood that every moment of intimacy they shared had been part of her long-term plan to rob him blind. But Grandpa and we rebuilt. We took that hotel chain and turned it into something even more beautiful than before. We focused on sustainable luxury, on preserving historic architecture while incorporating modern environmental standards. We created jobs for local communities, supported artists and craftspeople, made the hotels into cultural centers that celebrated the heritage of each location. Every decision we made was a rejection of her values, her approach to business, her belief that profit was the only thing that mattered. We proved that you could be successful while still maintaining integrity, that you could grow a business while still honoring the past, that you could make money while still treating people with dignity and respect. If you believe good people still win, hit like and subscribe right now. Comment, "I stand with Emily," so Grandpa's message keeps spreading. Every name in the comments shows that truth still matters, that family loyalty isn't dead, that some things are worth fighting for. 3 years later, I'm standing on the balcony of our flagship hotel, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that remind me of my mother's watercolor paintings. Grandpa is gone now, he passed peacefully last spring. Knowing that his legacy was secure, that the empire he'd built would continue to honor the values he'd instilled in it. His death was a mercy in some ways. He'd been fighting cancer for 2 years, never letting it slow him down, never complaining about the pain or the treatments. Right up until the end, he was reviewing architectural plans, approving renovation budgets, making sure every detail met his standards. The business is thriving, but more than that, it's meaningful. Every renovation we complete, every community partnership we establish, every sustainable practice we implement, it's all in service of something bigger than profit. It's about creating spaces where families can make memories, where travelers can experience beauty and culture, where employees can build careers they're proud of. Grandpa didn't just leave me his empire. He left me his courage, his foresight, his understanding that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones you need to protect yourself from, and his warning that sometimes family isn't your bloodline, it's your backbone. The people who stand by you when everything is at stake, who choose integrity over easy money, who see your vision and help you build it, those are your real family. Blood relation doesn't guarantee loyalty, and loyalty doesn't require blood relation. I think about my father sometimes. Wonder if he ever realized what he lost. Not just the money or the business, but the relationship with his daughter, the respect of his community, the chance to be part of something lasting and meaningful. I think about whether he misses the man he used to be before she poisoned his heart against his own family. The last time I saw him, he looked 10 years older than his age. The guilt and shame had carved lines into his face, had bent his shoulders, had stolen the confidence that had once made him so successful in business. He couldn't meet my eyes when he came to collect his personal belongings from the house. He tried to apologize, tried to explain how she'd manipulated him, how sorry he was for everything that had happened. But the words felt hollow, too little and too late. The damage was done, the trust was broken, the relationship was beyond repair. But mostly, I think about Grandpa. About the way he taught me that power isn't about controlling others, it's about protecting what matters. About how he showed me that real strength comes from standing up for your principles, even when everyone around you is telling you to compromise them. He used to tell me stories about the early days, when he was building the first hotel with his own hands, working construction during the day, and doing the books at night. How he'd promised my grandmother that someday their children and grandchildren would never have to worry about money, would never have to struggle the way they had. But more than financial security, he wanted to leave us something meaningful. He wanted to create a business that would make the world a little more beautiful, that would preserve history and culture, that would treat its employees and customers with respect and dignity. He didn't give me a hotel. He gave me the power to protect it, the wisdom to see through deception, the courage to fight for what's right, and the understanding that some things, family loyalty, personal integrity, the responsibility to preserve what previous generations built, are worth any sacrifice. That's the real inheritance he left me. Not the money or the buildings or the business empire, but the knowledge that I'm strong enough to carry forward something bigger than myself, and wise enough to recognize the difference between people who want to help me build and people who want to tear down everything I'm trying to protect. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure his trust in me was justified. Every decision I make, every person I hire, every renovation I approve it, all carries the weight of his legacy, the responsibility of his dreams. The promise I made to him that what he built will continue to honor the values he believed in. The empire isn't just mine now. It's mine to protect, mine to grow, mine to pass on to the next generation when my time comes. And I'll make damn sure that whoever inherits it from me understands what it really means to be worthy of that trust.